archetypal ideas, a stream of archetypal ideas that goes on through one individual, through the centuries.
What if Carl Jung once prepared a lecture so dangerous that he decided the world wasn't ready to hear it? Hidden between his writings and visions are clues of a teaching he kept in the shadows, how to contact the archetypes not as abstract symbols, but as living forces that can transform or even consume us. Jung believed these powers move through myths, dreams and cultures, shaping the way we see reality itself. Yet he also warned that facing them directly could dissolve the very sense of self. Today we'll explore the fragments of that forbidden lecture and uncover what Jung may have left unsaid. The whisper of the forbidden lecture. There are moments in history when an idea is considered too powerful, too dangerous, or too destabilizing to be openly shared. In the life of Carl Jung, one of those moments may have been a lecture he never delivered in public, a lecture whispered about but never published, a lecture that concerned the possibility of contacting the archetypes directly. In one, he was the careful scientist, cataloguing patterns of dreams and myths. In the other, he was the visionary, keeping secret notebooks filled with dialogues with figures that no one else could see. In those notebooks, later revealed in the Red Book, Jung recorded conversations with voices that rose out of the darkness of his psyche. To him, these were not fictions or fantasies, but presences with their own intelligence. They were not just symbols, as a psychologist might label them, but beings that carried a strange weight, like gods stepping into a mortal's dream. To reveal this too openly would have been professional suicide, so much of it was kept hidden until long after his death. Jung believed that archetypes were not invented by culture or language. They existed long before human civilization, patterns in the psyche as old as fire and water. In myths, they appeared as gods and heroes. In personal dreams, they showed up as figures both terrifying and familiar. For Jung, to contact an archetype was to stand before an eternal force, wearing a mask suited to one's own imagination. He knew that such encounters could both heal and shatter, and that they carried a danger as great as their promise. The ancient world also understood this. In Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries drew initiates into underground chambers, where they were given visions of life, death, and rebirth. Participants emerged transformed, convinced that death itself was no longer something to fear. Jung studied these rites with fascination, recognizing that they were structured encounters with archetypal powers. The difference was that the Greeks cloaked the experience in sacred ritual, while Jung wondered if the same powers might appear within the depths of the individual psyche. Imagine, then, a lecture where Jung spoke without restraint. He might have described the way an archetype approaches, not as a metaphor but as a presence felt in the body, a sudden shift in the atmosphere of the mind. He might have told the story of a traveller walking alone through a silent forest. Then comes a voice, clear and undeniable, speaking words that no one else can hear. The traveller freezes, torn between fear and awe, knowing that to answer could change everything. This parable mirrors Jung's own experience, the shock of realizing that the unconscious is not silent, but filled with voices waiting for us to listen. According to Jung, they existed on another level of reality, one that could alter a person's life as deeply as anything happening outside. He wrestled with this truth in solitude, fearing that his colleagues in psychology would call him mad if he admitted that his deepest teachers were beings from within. And yet, in private writings, he confessed that without those encounters, he would have been lost, swallowed by depression and emptiness. Why then was this knowledge too dangerous to share widely? Jung understood that without preparation, people could be consumed by the archetypes. The voice that offers wisdom could just as easily lead to obsession, even possession. Some arrive as storms, others as serpents, others as dazzling visions that blind more than they reveal. To tell people that they could invite these forces directly, without guidance or protection, would have been to hand them fire with no vessel to contain it. Hints surfaced in his lectures, guarded phrasing filled his books, while his letters carried a freer voice. The full force of what he had seen remained hidden, as if waiting for a time when the world would be ready to hear. Yet the silence only deepens the mystery. What would it mean to approach the archetypes not as distant myths, but as living realities we can touch. What would it mean to follow the voice in the forest, even if no one else can hear it? To even consider what Jung held back is to stand at the edge of the unknown, where symbol begins to breathe and myth becomes personal. The question is whether we dare to take the step he hinted at, but rarely described, to look behind the curtain of the psyche and face what waits there. When symbols come alive. To stand at the edge of Jung's forbidden lecture is to begin sensing how symbols shift and breathe. They are not lifeless pictures on the walls of the mind, but doors that open into rooms we did not know existed. The moment a symbol begins to move, to speak, to appear in a dream or vision, it ceases to be a concept and becomes an encounter. Jung believed that this was where psychology brushed against the sacred. Dreams provide the first stage of this transformation. A simple image, like a serpent coiling in the shadows, may arrive without explanation, but its impact is unmistakable. In Jung's view, such a dream was not a random firing of neurons, it was an arrival, a visitation by a presence that already existed within the deeper layers of the psyche. Ancient traditions often treated these dream figures as messengers. In Hindu stories, there are many accounts of deities who appear to people while they sleep, offering instruction, warning, or blessing. These were not dismissed as illusions. They were received as gifts from the divine, carried through the language of symbol. Jung admired how these cultures respected the depth of dreams, for he saw in them the same process at work, archetypes stepping into the human mind through images that shimmer with life. The philosopher Plato also hinted at this world of living symbols. His theory of forms described a realm where the pure essence of things existed before they ever took shape in the material world. A circle in the mind, he suggested, was not a mere drawing, but a shadow of the perfect circle in the eternal realm of forms. To Jung, archetypes functioned much the same way. They were not invented by the human mind, just as the circle was not invented by the hand that draws it. They already existed in an unseen reality, and what appeared in dream or myth was their reflection, shimmering like sunlight on water. Modern psychology, though often cautious of mystical language, has stumbled upon evidence that echoes this idea. Studies on recurring dream symbols reveal that across cultures, people often report similar images: falling, being chased, finding hidden rooms, and encountering strangers with familiar faces. Jung would have said that these repetitions are the fingerprints of the archetypes, revealing themselves in the private theatre of dreams. Even in the sterile light of the laboratory, the symbols continue to live, refusing to be reduced to chance or habit. When symbols come alive, they carry a force that words alone cannot capture. A myth told by a grandmother at night can feel like a spell, not because of its plot, but because of the figures that rise within it. They are archetypal shapes pressing through the story, entering the imagination of the listener and leaving an imprint that can last a lifetime. Jung saw myths from every culture as proof that archetypes are not bound to a single time or place. They appear wherever humans dare to tell stories about the mystery of life. The boundary between inner and outer worlds often blurs when symbols awaken. A vision of a bird might appear in a dream, and the next morning a bird crosses one's path in waking life, carrying the same quality of significance. For Jung, this was synchronicity, the meeting of inner image and outer event. To treat it as a coincidence is to miss the way the archetype speaks through both realities, weaving them together like threads of the same tapestry. What is striking is how similar the experiences appear across vastly different cultures and centuries. A Hindu devotee, a Greek philosopher, a modern dreamer hooked up to electrodes in a sleep study, they each touch the same realm when a symbol emerges and takes shape. Jung pointed to this as evidence that something deeper than personal memory is at work. Beneath the surface of individual lives lies a shared field of images, a reservoir where the archetypes reside. This realization brings us closer to Jung's most daring claim. Symbols are not only alive, they are universal. They belong to no single person, yet they appear in the lives of all who dream, all who imagine, all who wonder. The great question that follows is where this reservoir exists and how it connects every human mind to the same well of imagery. To answer that question, Jung turned to what he called the collective unconscious, the place where the archetypes dwell before they rise into dream, vision, or story. The collective unconscious as a living field. Beneath the private stream of dreams and memories, Jung imagined a deeper current, one that does not belong to any single person. He called this the collective unconscious, though the phrase can be misleading if taken as a mere archive. To him, it was not a vault of forgotten images, but a living field, a space where timeless patterns breathe and wait to be revealed. The archetypes that emerge in myth and dream are not artifacts stored away. They are currents of power, as real as the wind that bends trees or the river that shapes stone. The living nature of this field can be seen in how cultures separated by oceans and centuries still share the same archetypal visions. African traditions speak of ancestral spirits who continue to guide the living. These ancestors do not linger as memories only. They act, advise and warn through ritual and dream. Families gather around fires to pour libations, not as a gesture of nostalgia, but as an acknowledgement that the ancestors are still present in the invisible landscape. Jung might have said that these ancestral presences are one expression of the same collective field he studied, archetypal energies given shape through the lineage of a people. The image of interconnectedness is captured with striking clarity in the Buddhist myth of Indra's net. Imagine an infinite net stretched across the cosmos, with a jewel at each intersection. Every jewel reflects every other, so that within one gem you can see the entire universe mirrored. This vision aligns closely with Jung's sense of the collective unconscious. Each human mind is like one of the jewels, shining with its own experiences, yet reflecting the whole field of archetypal patterns. When a person dreams of a serpent, or a hero, or a wise elder, it is not only their personal psyche speaking, it is the collective net of the unconscious reflecting itself through them. Alchemy fascinated Jung because it offered symbols of this same process. Medieval alchemists wrote of transforming lead into gold, but Jung saw their texts as coded descriptions of psychic transformation. The alchemist recorded visions of kings and queens uniting, serpents devouring themselves, suns rising within flasks of glass. To Jung, these were not metaphors invented by clever minds. They were archetypal figures arising from the collective field, shaping the inner work of transformation. What astonished him was that alchemists across Europe, often working in isolation, produced the same images again and again. This repetition revealed that their visions were not personal inventions but expressions of something deeper moving through them. The collective unconscious, then, is not a static storehouse, but a dynamic presence. It is as if humanity shares a hidden root system underground, unseen but nourishing all visible life above. When myths repeat across cultures, when rituals echo each other from continent to continent, when dreams produce the same patterns in different languages, the field reveals itself. It breathes through us, often unnoticed, until symbols arise to remind us that we are never dreaming alone. Consider the way entire societies shift when archetypal energies surface collectively. A revolution may carry the archetype of the hero, casting ordinary figures into the roles of saviors. A cultural obsession with apocalypse films may reflect the archetype of death and rebirth seeking expression. Jung argued that history itself is often moved by archetypes, pressing into the collective imagination and shaping events as much as political strategy or economics. This idea suggests that when we encounter archetypes in dreams or visions, we are not simply meeting private images. We are touching the same forces that inspire myths, guide traditions, and reshape cultures. The personal and the collective are woven together, just as each jewel in Indra's net reflects all the others. To recognize this is to begin sensing that the unconscious is not merely within us, but also around us, a field we inhabit like air. Yet knowing this only in theory is not enough. Jung insisted that the collective unconscious must be experienced directly, not just studied. To read about it is to glimpse the reflection of a jewel from afar. To enter into contact is to step inside the jewel and see the whole net illuminated. The challenge is how to move from intellectual understanding into lived experience, and how to approach such vast energies without being consumed by them. Descent into the inner world. Turning toward the collective field is not an act of looking outward, but of descending inward. Jung discovered that the gateway to the deeper layers of the psyche is not reached through analysis alone, but through direct encounter. He called this practice active imagination, a way of stepping consciously into the dreamlike stream of images and allowing them to unfold as if one were entering another world. Meditation, vision, and even deliberate daydreaming could serve the same function. provided that one approached them with openness rather than control. The first encounters in this descent are rarely beautiful. Before the shining figures of the archetypes appear, one must pass through what Jung called the shadow. These are the denied, rejected, or hidden parts of the self, surfacing not to punish, but to demand recognition. Jung discovered his own shadow figures in visions during the years when he felt closest to collapse. They appeared as hostile presences, grotesque faces, and voices that mocked or threatened him. Yet he came to understand that to ignore them was to remain forever split within himself. The shadow stood as the guardian of the gate, refusing entry until it was faced. The poet Rumi captured the same truth in a parable he often told. He spoke of a guest arriving at one's house in the night, a figure cloaked in darkness who pounds at the door. The instinct is to bar the entrance, to pretend no one is home, but Rumi insists that this guest must be welcomed, for it carries a hidden gift. What seems at first to be a frightening intruder may be a teacher in disguise, bringing wisdom that could never come from a friend who flatters. Jung read such stories with recognition, for they mirrored his own insight. The parts of ourselves we fear most often contain the key to transformation. Jung warned that refusing this guest only strengthens its grip, causing the shadow to erupt in destructive ways in daily life. By opening the door, however reluctantly, one begins the slow work of reclaiming what was cast out. Dante's Divine Comedy offers another image of this descent. Before he could glimpse the stars again, Dante had to travel downward through the 9 circles of hell, guided by Virgil. Every step revealed grotesque reflections of human vice, mirrors of what is denied or corrupted. Jung saw Dante's journey not only as a Christian vision, but as a map of psychological descent. To reach the paradise of the archetypes, one must first walk through the inferno of the shadow. Only by acknowledging what is hidden and frightening can the deeper treasures be reached. The practice of active imagination makes this mythic journey concrete. Jung would sit quietly, close his eyes, and allow images to rise. If a figure appeared, he spoke to it. If a voice answered, he listened. Sometimes the dialogue was brief, sometimes it stretched for pages. These encounters could be deeply unsettling, for the figures did not always agree with him or say what he wanted to hear. They had their own perspectives, their own truths. By treating them as real presences rather than illusions, Jung found that the psyche began to reveal layers far richer than any theory could explain. Fear inevitably arises in such encounters. To see a shadow figure staring back at you in imagination is to feel the uncanny sense that the mind is not yours alone. Jung wrestled with this, often asking himself whether he was slipping into madness. Yet the more he engaged, the more he saw that the shadow was not there to destroy him, but to break the walls of denial he had built. Each confrontation made him more whole, drawing together the scattered fragments of his being. The tension of this stage cannot be softened. Meeting the shadow means standing at a threshold where revelation and terror walk hand in hand. Rumi's dark guest, Dante's descent, Jung's own visions, they all point to the same truth. The path inward begins with what we most want to avoid. Only through that confrontation does the deeper field of the psyche open further, preparing the way for another presence to arrive. After the shadow, another archetype often appears, one who comes not as an enemy but as a guide, a teacher, or even a companion for the journey still to unfold. The guide and the teacher archetype. After confronting the shadow, one often feels suspended in a void, unsure of where to go next. Out of this emptiness, figures of guidance begin to emerge, carrying a presence that feels both reassuring and mysterious. They do not arrive on command, and they often speak in riddles, but their appearance marks a turning point in the journey inward. Jung described these guides as essential companions, for without them the traveller risks losing direction in the vast terrain of the unconscious. In Greek tradition, Hermes served as the psychopomp, the one who led souls across the threshold between worlds. He was quick, cunning, and unpredictable, sometimes offering wisdom and sometimes mischief, but always carrying the ability to navigate boundaries others could not cross. For Jung, such myths reflected the archetype of the guide, reminding him that any true teacher of the inner world carries both light and shadow. Approaching them required caution, since their guidance could liberate but also deceive. Shamans in Siberian cultures carried a similar role, entering trance to traverse realms of spirit and return with knowledge for their community. These journeys were not solitary escapes, but structured passages supported by tradition, songs, and ritual. The shaman embodied the archetype of the teacher, not by holding authority in the ordinary sense, but by acting as a bridge between the visible and invisible. Jung observed that such practices mirrored the experiences recorded in his own inner explorations, suggesting that the psyche spontaneously produces these guiding figures across all cultures. When Jung himself confronted the depths of his unconscious, a figure named Philemon appeared to him repeatedly. Unlike fleeting dream images, Philemon became a lasting presence, offering teachings on the nature of the soul and the cosmos. Jung painted him with wings of a kingfisher and the beard of an old sage, granting him both an earthly and otherworldly character. What struck Jung most was not that he imagined Philemon, but that Philemon seemed to think and speak independently, as though he carried knowledge Jung himself did not yet possess. Encounters with such guides raise the question of whether they are simply inner projections or truly autonomous presences. Jung often answered by saying that the psyche itself is objective, that these figures carry a reality of their own, regardless of whether one interprets them as spirits or as parts of the mind. The crucial point was not debating their origin, but learning how to relate to them with respect and discernment. To ignore them risked losing the chance to learn, to follow them blindly risked falling into delusion. The guide's teachings often arrive in symbolic form, through images, sayings, or sudden insights that illuminate hidden truths. They rarely give direct instructions, for their purpose is not to dictate but to awaken. Just as Hermes tricked and taught in equal measure, the inner guide may challenge the traveller with paradoxes that unsettle ordinary thinking. The aim is transformation, not comfort, and the true measure of the guide lies in how they expand one's capacity to see. Jung understood that not all guides come as wise elders. Some appear as tricksters, children, or even animals, carrying lessons in unexpected ways. A teacher may arrive as a bird delivering a wordless message, or as a dream companion who insists on taking the longer road. These variations reveal that the archetype of the guide adapts to the form one most needs, whether that is instruction, challenge, or protection. Each form carries the same essence, the presence of an intelligence that points beyond the ego's limited view. As the traveller moves deeper into this relationship, the guide begins to reveal not just personal truths, but collective ones. Jung felt that Philemon gave him insights about humanity as a whole, speaking in tones that stretch beyond his private struggles. In this sense, the guide archetype becomes a mediator between the individual and the collective unconscious, offering glimpses of truths that echo across myths, rituals, and spiritual traditions worldwide. The presence of the guide prepares the traveller for greater encounters still to come. It builds trust in the reality of the inner world and teaches the skills of listening, patience, and discernment. Yet Jung hinted that behind this figure of the teacher lies something more immense, forces that embody creation and destruction themselves. The guide does not replace these powers, but introduces the traveller to the threshold where they wait. Meeting the great archetypes. When the figure of the guide has prepared the traveller, other presences begin to step forward, vast in scale and heavy with meaning. Jung described these as the great archetypes, patterns of energy that hold the dramas of humanity within them. They are not fleeting images, but forces that shape myths, religions, and personal visions alike. To encounter them is to stand before something both intimate and larger than life. Among the most ancient of these is the Great Mother, whose face carries both nurture and terror. In Egyptian tradition, Isis embodied this archetype, a goddess of healing and protection who also demanded loyalty and devotion. She appeared in dreams as a figure of comfort, wrapping the soul in her wings, yet her myths reminded seekers that she held power over life and death. Jung saw in such images the paradox of the mother archetype, at once the source of creation and the one who reabsorbs all things back into herself. Another figure that rises repeatedly across cultures is the hero. Joseph Campbell later called this the central pattern of the hero's journey, where one leaves the familiar world, confronts trials, gains new wisdom, and returns transformed. Jung recognized this structure as an expression of the archetypal process of individuation. Heroes in myth, whether Gilgamesh, Odysseus, or the Wandering Knight, represent the part of the psyche that ventures into the unknown, faces danger, and emerges changed. In dreams, this archetype often appears as a younger version of the dreamer, setting out to face challenges that the waking self has avoided. The wise old man also emerges in visions, often bearing the role of counselor or prophet. He is not always gentle. Sometimes he confronts the seeker with harsh truths that pierce through illusions. Jung experienced this presence in Philemon, but also in figures that bore no name, arriving with words that seemed carved from a deeper wisdom. Across cultures, this archetype has taken forms as varied as shamans, sages and wandering monks, all pointing to knowledge that transcends ordinary experience. These presences are not limited to the imagination. Psychological accounts describe states of archetypal possession, when an individual becomes overtaken by the energy of one of these forces. A person seized by the hero may grow reckless, chasing conquest without balance. Another consumed by the mother may smother those around them in the name of care. Jung warned that when an archetype dominates, it bends perception and behaviour so powerfully that one can forget there is a life beyond its grasp. The challenge is not to resist these forces but to hold them consciously, allowing their energy to transform without losing oneself entirely. Jung compared this state to being caught in the orbit of a planet where the gravitational pull of the archetype is so strong that it bends thought, emotion, and action around its centre. The great archetypes often announce themselves through symbols, dreams, or visions that feel charged with extraordinary intensity. A dreamer might see a vast temple where a radiant figure waits, or a landscape torn apart by a colossal battle. Such experiences are not simply personal fantasies, but reflections of the deeper structure of the psyche, the stage upon which humanity has always played out its myths. Jung believed that when we dream of gods, heroes, or wise elders, we are touching the same field that once inspired epics and scriptures. Because these archetypes carry such weight, they evoke powerful emotions: wonder, awe, and at times terror. The Great Mother's embrace may bring profound peace, while her darker face may summon the fear of being swallowed whole. The hero may inspire courage, but also reckless pride. Each figure holds within it both gift and danger, a dual nature that demands respect. To stand in their presence is to feel the full scale of what the unconscious contains, far beyond what the ego can comfortably manage. Guides may open the door, but once these archetypes arrive, they reshape the journey entirely. Their appearance reveals that the inner world is not a private theatre, but a place where timeless dramas unfold. The seeker realizes they are not only exploring their own psyche, but stepping into the same mythic field that shaped cultures and civilizations. And yet, as Jung often warned, such encounters are not without risk, for the intensity of these presences can overwhelm as easily as they illuminate. The danger of direct contact. In the presence of the great archetypes, one feels an energy that ordinary existence can never offer. The encounter can awaken vision, courage, and profound understanding, yet it also carries the risk of being consumed by forces larger than the self. Jung hinted that this was the reason he spoke carefully about the direct approach. To invite the archetypes in without preparation was like calling a storm into the room and hoping to remain untouched. Shamanic traditions across Siberia and other parts of the world recognized this peril. The would-be shaman often underwent what was called initiation sickness, a period of collapse and disorientation in which the boundaries of identity dissolved. Fever, hallucinations, and visions of death and rebirth marked the passage. The suffering was not considered a sign of failure but of transformation, a breaking open of the ordinary self so that a new role as healer and mediator could take root. In this light, Jung saw parallels with the modern psyche. When archetypal forces pressed too strongly, a person could feel torn apart, but the ordeal also held the seeds of renewal. Philosophy, too, carried warnings about such encounters. Friedrich Nietzsche's vision of eternal recurrence was not merely an abstract thought experiment, but a confrontation with the weight of infinity. To imagine living the same life again and again eternally was to measure whether one could affirm existence at its deepest level. Nietzsche himself wrestled with visions and breakdowns that blurred the boundary between genius and collapse. For Jung, Nietzsche's fate illustrated both the brilliance and the danger of being overtaken by a mythic idea without finding a way to anchor it in daily life. Jung's own experiences taught him that the unconscious does not play gently with those who trespass its depths. In Psychology and Alchemy, he warned that archetypal images can invade consciousness with such force that they shatter the ego's fragile stability. He likened this to the alchemical fire, which could purify but also destroy the vessel that contained it. Without the strength to hold the heat, the psyche risked falling into chaos. He admitted that his own Red Book years were a perilous balancing act, walking close to the edge of madness while seeking the gold hidden in the visions. What makes direct contact so destabilizing is that it dissolves the familiar sense of I. When the Great Mother rises within a dream or vision, the self may feel both nurtured and devoured, unable to tell where it ends and she begins. When the hero surges into one's actions, life can take on the clarity of destiny, but lose the grounding of ordinary care. The more powerful the archetype, the more it demands surrender, and in surrender, the line between guidance and possession grows thin. But focusing solely on danger overlooks what lies on the other side of the edge. Many mystics across traditions have sought precisely this dissolving, describing it as union with the divine. The boundary between self and archetype, between individual and cosmos, becomes porous, and what remains is a vision of belonging to something eternal. The difference between the mystic and the lost wanderer is often the presence of a framework, a community, or a symbolic language to help interpret what has been seen. Where such containers exist, the experience can be woven into meaning. Where they do not, it can fragment the mind. Perhaps it was because Jung understood this tension so well that he handled the idea of teaching direct contact so cautiously. He valued the transformative potential of archetypal encounters, yet he also carried respect for their destructive capacity. Like the shaman who must endure sickness before becoming a healer, or the philosopher who risks madness in pursuit of truth, the modern seeker faces a threshold that demands both courage and humility. The question is never only whether the archetypes will appear, but whether one can return from the meeting without losing the thread of life. What follows from this awareness is the necessity of integration. Visions, dreams, and archetypal presences cannot remain isolated events. They must be carried back into the rhythms of work, relationships, and the body itself. Otherwise, the fire burns without shaping, and the wisdom dissolves as quickly as it came. To touch the archetypes directly is to risk everything, but the greater challenge still lies ahead, finding a way to live with what has been revealed. Integration and the return. The aftermath of a vision is often quieter than the encounter itself. Once the intensity of the archetype recedes, what remains is the slow, uncertain work of carrying its meaning into daily life. Jung believed this was the most important part of the journey. To have seen the depths is one thing, to return and live differently because of it is another. Alchemy offered him a language for this process. The image of turning lead into gold was not only about transforming metals, but about the human task of refining raw experience into wisdom. Leads symbolize the heavy, unconscious material that first surfaces in visions and dreams, often dark and chaotic. Gold represented the conscious realization that emerges when the experience is integrated, a light that can be shared. For Jung, the alchemical fire was not complete until the substance had cooled and been shaped into something usable. Anthropologist Mircea Eliade wrote of shamans who, after enduring the terrors of initiation sickness and journeys through other realms, always returned to their community. Their visions were not kept as private treasures, but offered in the form of healing, guidance, and ritual. The shaman's return mattered as much as their departure, for it was in the return that their ordeal gained meaning. Jung saw a parallel for modern seekers. No matter how far one travels inward, the true test lies in rejoining the world with new insight. A parable speaks of a merchant who sold all he had to buy a single pearl of great price. This image captures the cost and the value of inner discovery. The pearl cannot be gained without sacrifice, and once found, it cannot be hoarded in secrecy. Its worth becomes clear only when it changes the life of the one who sought it. Archetypal encounters, Jung suggested, are pearls of this kind. They ask for surrender, but they also shine with a radiance that can illuminate ordinary existence. Integration is never simple. The vision may resist translation, remaining in the form of images or emotions too vast for words. Dreams of the Great Mother or encounters with the hero do not easily fit into schedules or conversations, yet it is precisely this difficulty that demands patience and creativity. Jung encouraged painting, writing, or ritual as ways to give shape to the ineffable, so that the unconscious could find expression in forms the conscious mind could hold. Living with these experiences means allowing them to influence choices in subtle ways. A person who has confronted the shadow may discover new compassion for others' struggles. One who has felt the guidance of a teacher archetype may begin to listen more carefully to the quiet voice within. The gold of alchemy is rarely dramatic. It shows itself in the texture of everyday life, in the way relationships deepen and perspectives shift. There is also a humility that comes with the return. The archetypes remind us that we are participants in a story larger than ourselves. No matter how profound the vision, it is never owned by the individual. It belongs to the human field, surfacing in one life only to ripple outward into many. Jung urged that such encounters not inflate the ego but ground it, so the seeker becomes a vessel rather than a master of what has been seen. To walk back into the ordinary world after contact with the extraordinary is to carry both burden and gift. The burden is the difficulty of translation, the weight of knowing more than words can convey. The gift is the quiet strength that comes from having touched the roots of meaning. Myths and visions lose their danger only when they are lived out in balance, informing work, love, and creativity. It may be that Jung withheld his forbidden lecture, knowing words could never capture both the danger and the promise of direct contact. What he left instead were clues, paintings in his red book, warnings in his studies, and fragments of guidance scattered through his writings. Taken together, they form an invitation to continue the journey ourselves. The lecture may remain unwritten, but its spirit lingers in every dream, every symbol, every whisper that draws us toward the depths. Thank you for joining this journey. If you found it meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more explorations into the hidden depths of the mind.